Welcome back, everybody. Hope everyone's doing well. My name is Jason. I'll be your host today on this CFL talk show, Untitled. In this video, we're going to look back at the last 10 winners of the CFL's Most Outstanding Player award and rank them on a number of criteria. And a lot of this is going to be up to personal interpretation. So, fair warning, if you disagree with one of my picks, please let me know your own picks down in the comment section. There's a reason I'm wearing Calgary today as well, because they're very well represented on today's list. But really quickly before we get into it, if you want to support the channel, the best way to do it is by hitting that like button and subscribing to Untitled for more CFL content just like this. I upload weekly videos on this channel based on the CFL, and I would greatly appreciate all your support. With that said, let's get started. So for those that are new to the CFL or are not aware of how the CFL awards process works, the Most Outstanding Player award is very similar to the MVP award that you'll see given out in all the major sports leagues, with the only major difference, I would say, is because it's Most Outstanding Player, it has really opened up the avenue for players that are not quarterbacks to win the award, especially in recent years. And with that said, let's go into the criteria that I'm going to be using to evaluate these 10 MOP campaigns and what I'm going to be looking at to differentiate them. Number one is the overall statistical excellence has to be there. That is going to be basically the baseline that you look at when you look at the numbers, and that's pretty self-explanatory. Number two, I'm going to look at the impact on the team's overall record. Even though it's Most Outstanding Player, we can't overlook how much the player's efforts actually impacted winning games. Especially when you're doing a comparison video like this, it's really hard not to look at how the team that the player was on actually performed. And number three is the historical significance / memorability of the MOP campaign. This is kind of just a personal reflection on it, and obviously the historical part is how much is that campaign different in terms of its uniqueness in CFL history. And for the memorability part, it's basically, since these are all recent guys, these are all players that I've experienced, I can look back on like, wow, that guy was really good that year, and that kind of thing. You know, that's kind of a little bit of a interpretation bias thing, like I said in the beginning of the video, but it's needed to try to differentiate these guys. And then finally, remember, it's just a regular season award, guys. We will not factor in the playoffs or Grey Cups in terms of the player's overall performance. So if they flopped in the playoffs, say as a quarterback, they had a horrible game in the playoffs, then it doesn't really count towards this award. I'm not really considering it because this award is awarded based on the regular season. And with that said, let's dive into the list. The first player on this list is going to be at number 10, 2012, wide receiver / kick returner Chad Owens of the Toronto Argonauts, who won the award. He played in 18 games, had 94 receptions for 1,328 receiving yards and 6 touchdowns, averaged about 14 yards per catch, while also contributing 828 punt return yards, 10.8 yards per return. He also was an electric kick returner, though he never scored a touchdown on a return during this particular 2012 seasons. He did in other seasons of his career. And the Argonauts actually finished 9-9 in the second place in the Eastern Division in this particular season. Though he had an excellent year receiving with 94 receptions, only 6 total touchdowns on the year really stands out when you match him up against the other 10 winners of this award. And also the Argos finishing only 9-9, second place in the Eastern Division, which was the weaker division that year. That also drags it down and is why he finds himself at number 10 on this list. At number 9, we have 2010, and that is quarterback Henry Burris of the Calgary Stampeders. He played in 18 games that year, threw almost for 5,000 yards, threw 39 touchdowns against 20 interceptions, averaging 8.8 yards per attempt while completing 66.2% of his passes, and also contributed a lot on the ground as well, 491 rushing yards and 3 rushing touchdowns. His Stampeders team finished 13-5, first in the Western Division. His 2010 season was incredible, but I just don't think it was as memorable in my mind as the other MOP seasons that he did have, as in the one he wins later on, which we'll be talking about later on this list. And what really catches your eye from a statistical standpoint is, yes, he had 42 combined touchdowns, but he also threw 20 interceptions, which is really high for an MOP winner. Those that have watched Burris, he was capable of these big interception games. I remember him from his time with the Tiger Cats. He was a fantastic player, one of the best quarterbacks I've ever seen, but That was one thing he was capable of, and I don't think this was really the best he ever played in the CFL, and it's not the MLP campaign that really sticks out in my mind as one of the most significant in recent memory. At number 8, we have 2018's quarterback Bo Levi Mitchell of the Calgary Stampeders again. 18 games played, 5,124 passing yards, 35 touchdowns, 14 interceptions, 8.8 yards per attempt, while completing 60.9 completion percentage, and really doing nothing significant on the ground. No rushing touchdowns, only 108 rushing yards. His team did finish 13-5, first in the West that year, but this is along the same lines as the Burris campaign before it. I think this is the lesser of the MLP seasons that Mitchell has had in the CFL, even though that really just shows you how well Mitchell's career has gone to this point in the CFL. And with that said, it was still fantastic, and this actually still stands as the quarterback's career high in touchdown passes. However, I just don't think this was as good of a quarterback season as some of the others on this list, especially in the turnover and completion percentage department. Now moving on to number 7, in 2014 we had linebacker Solomon Aluminium of the BC Lions winning the award. He played in 18 games, had 143 defensive tackles, 8 special teams tackles, 5 sacks, 1 interception, and 2 forced fumbles. His team finished 9-9, which was 4th in the West, enough for a crossover playoff spot. This is one of the most historic MLP wins in recent years, as Aluminium became the first full-time defensive player to win the award. Aluminium was an absolute dominant force at linebacker back in his days with the BC Lions, which included setting multiple CFL tackle records. As far as his season's ranking among the other winners, however, it doesn't really stack up well, especially when you consider the team only finished 9-9, which was tied for the worst record of any team that was on this list. The stats, in terms of everything outside of tackles, he didn't really put up anything else that was really outstanding, even though, I mean, tackling really is the name of the game in the CFL. And so I can't put Aluminium farther than this on this list. I wanted to, but I just couldn't based on the other players that are on this list. At number 6, we have 2011 quarterback Travis Luley of the BC Lions. He played in 18 games that year, threw for 4,815 passing yards, 32 touchdowns, 11 interceptions, while throwing 8.3 yards per attempt and 58.7% completion percentage. He also rushed for 391 rushing yards and had 3 rushing touchdowns, and his team finished 11-7, first in the West that year, which that's not the most impressive of records you're going to see on this list from a team perspective. However, what you have to remember about this year was that the BC Lions, that was the year that they started 0-5, and then they roared back and finished first in the West and just got super hot over that last 2/3 of the season, and were able to take that momentum and actually win the Grey Cup. And while I'm not including that as consideration for this list, it's still remarkable that the team was able to finish first in the West after digging themselves quite a hole, and Travis Luley was a huge part in doing that for the BC Lions that year, and was very deserving of the CFL's Most Outstanding Player award, and that's why I have him at number 6. Moving on to number 5, we have 2015, and that was quarterback Henry Burris of the Ottawa Redblacks this time. He played in 18 games, threw for 5,693 passing yards, 26 touchdowns, 13 interceptions, 8.4 yards per attempt, and a 70.9% completion percentage, which is just incredible. He also rushed for 274 yards with 7 touchdowns, and the Red Blacks were actually able to finish first in the East with a 12-6 record that year. Now, this is the campaign I was talking about earlier in the video when I was talking about Burris' other MLP win. This is the one that really stands out to me because I thought when he left Hamilton, he was done. He was approaching 40 years old at the time, but he really just turned back the clock, and he had an incredible season this year. You just look at the numbers. Even though the touchdowns maybe are not as high as other guys on this list, the efficiency is just insane. He really put that new franchise on his back, which was just in its second year at that point, and brought them all the way to the Grey Cup game, even though that's not a consideration for this list. They were able to finish first in the East, and that is a really good record for an East team. Usually you don't see an East team finishing anything better than that, and as a result, I gotta have Henry Burris at number 5 on this list, above several other candidates. At number 4, we have quarterback Mike Riley in 2017. In 18 games played, he threw for 5,830 passing yards, 30 touchdowns, 13 interceptions, while throwing 8.9 yards per attempt at a 68.3% completion rate. He also ran for 390 rushing yards while also rushing for 12 touchdowns at a 4 yards per carry. His team finished 12-6, which unfortunately in that year was only good enough for third in the West. But this was an incredible season by Mike Riley. This was the most combined touchdowns, I believe, of any player on this list, other than maybe number 9, I think, was Henry Burris. I think he had 42 as well. But this season was just incredible, excellent from Mike Riley. Really put the Edmonton team on its back. And as a result, I think this season was just one of the best we've seen in recent memory. And again, at this point in the list, we're really splitting hairs between the teams. The one reason I did not put this one over the others was mostly just because the team was finishing third in the West, whereas you'll see these last 3, they put up excellent records while also putting up just as good numbers as Riley did in this scenario. That's why he finds himself at number 4 on this list, even though I think for some people he may be at number 1. At number 3, we have wide receiver / kick returner Brandon Banks of the Hamilton Tiger-Cats, who won the award in 2019. Banks played in 16 games that year. He had 112 receptions for 1,550 receiving yards and 13 receiving touchdowns. He also contributed a bit on the ground with another rushing touchdown there. That year, he actually had 283 missed field goal return yards. But here's the thing, he averaged 56.6 yards per those returns. So that means he only did it a few times. And he scored 2 touchdowns on only a minimal amount of returns, which really just shows you how much of a dangerous return man Brandon Banks is in the CFL when he's actually asked to do that role. And the reason why I have this so far up the list, and this is the most recent of the MOP winners on this list, is mostly just because Banks only played in 16 games that year, yet he had an absurd amount of receiving stats. The Tiger-Cats were a regular season juggernaut that year, finishing 15-3, best record that they've ever had. And Banks was really the catalyst of that, along with their other receiver, Braylon Addison. Really, Brandon Banks really just had one of the most outstanding seasons of this past decade, and that's why I have him at number 3 on this list. Now, the final 2, and sorry guys, they're both going to be Calgary Stampeders. In 2016, we have quarterback Levi Mitchell landing at number 2 on our list. He played in 18 games that year, threw for 5,385 passing yards, 32 passing touchdowns, 8 interceptions, 8.9 yards per attempt, and a 68% completion percentage. He also, again, didn't really do much on the ground, but that's not really Bo's style. He finished with a team record of 15-2-1, which is the best CFL record that I've ever seen in my lifetime. And it was really an incredible season from Bo Levi and the Stamps that year. I just remember, I'm like, are they ever going to lose? And the CFL season is not like the NFL season where a lot of times there's usually a team that finishes like 14-2 every year, sometimes 15-1. You just rarely see a team run the table in the CFL like the Stamps were basically doing that year. And it was just an incredible display of football excellence to see them beat the same opponents multiple times. And really, that's the challenge in the CFL. When you get to the point where you're playing the same teams again that have studied you over and over, and you're still able to put up such a dominant record. And that was really what was so impressive about Bo Levi's season that particular year. This was the best I've ever seen him play during that 2016 season. He was just so efficient. He kept his turnovers low. He was creating big plays. He completed such a large percentage of his passes, which wasn't really the case in his previous MOP win. Or sorry, I should say his future MOP win in 2018. And that's why I have to have him no lower than number 2 on this list. And then finally at number 1, we have running back John Cornish of the Calgary Stampeders again in 2013. He played in 17 games that year. He had 1,813 rushing yards on 258 attempts at a 7 yards per carry average, rushing for 12 touchdowns while also having 344 receiving yards, 42 receptions, and 2 receiving touchdowns. The Stamps that year finished with a 14-4 record, which was good enough for first in the West, and this was just an outstanding and an outlier season for a CFL player. And what I really think is so special about this John Cornish season was that in the CFL, it's very much a pass-heavy league. With the 3 downs, it's really exuberated how the importance of the passing game is. And so running backs, whenever they're able to have an impact on the game, that was just this pronounced. It's really incredible, and this is just the most dominant running back season of the past 10 years. I don't think it's really debatable. And with that said, that is going to be the end of today's video. I'd like to thank everyone for watching. Once again, please let me know your selections for the best MOP of the last 10 years. If you want to support the channel, the best way to do it is by hitting that like button and subscribing to Huskies Huddle for more CFL content just like this. I appreciate all the support, guys, and once again, I'll see you guys next time.